Welcome to the next lesson on looping, and in this short video I'm going to show you how loops work, what is the concept of a loop and how we do loops in Python programming. So before we start, I'll just introduce the concept of looping. So looping is the idea of a part of the program which continues in a continuous, either a fixed loop, a fixed number of times, or a conditional loop, so keep going until a condition is met. That is all part of the main programming concept. If you remember a while ago, we talked about sequence, selection and iteration. So sequence is one instruction after another. Selection is the if statement, or determining the flow of the program. And a loop is when you repeat a certain part of the program a number of times. So looping, this is a simple flowchart here showing you a loop where I've set a variable called count to 1. Which is up here, and add 1 to the count, so it becomes 2. Does the count equal 10? No. Go back to the beginning and add 1 to the count, and we keep doing that 10 times. So if you like, this is our we could create this as a fixed loop where we just say keep looping until the count equals 10 and then finish. Now actually this flowchart doesn't do very much at the moment apart from just count. We could add extra processes in there if you wanted to repeat a certain command or program X number of times. So looking at how we do this in Python, so the two programs I'm going to just walk you through here are what we call fixed loops, i.e. they're not based on a condition, they will just loop X number of times. So the structure in Python to do a loop is very simple. We use this command called for. For loop, as it's referred to in programming, is used in lots of programming languages. In Python, we do it in this particular way. So we create a variable. Now this variable can be called anything within the context of what a variable, how you should create variables. And then we use this command in range, open brackets, 12. Now this will loop 12 times. Now the way the range command works, and I think we've covered this before, is it always starts from 0 by default, and it will go up into the number 11. So in other words, it will loop 12 times, counting from 0 to 11. Again, we can do the same thing again, but this time I'm using rather than defaulting to 0, I'm going to be starting on 3 and going up to number 9. So it will loop that many times. Now the construct is the for, the name of the variable we want to use, the in range command. And then don't forget, as we've mentioned before, similar to the if statement, we use the colon. We also indent, as you can see here, using the tab key, to say that part of the code is part of that loop. And if we were to write another statement, we'd indent again to say that this part of the code is part of that statement. This part of the loop says, okay, print count in range 3 to 10, again, for count in range 3 to 10. So in here, what we're saying is start from 3 and go up to 9. And if I run this, you'll see the other programs as well, but we're just interested in this top one. You can see here, okay, it has gone from 0 to 11, as I said it would do. So it goes from 0 to 11. And each time it's printed out the contents of the variable count. All right. The next one, again, has done the same, but this time we start on 3 and it goes up to 9, which is over there. So this program has done what I went out to do. So just to recap the contents of for loop. So we've covered iteration, loops as part of the programming concept, sequence, selection and iteration. For loops in Python, we specify the variable name and the range that we want, with the default starting from 0. And we can also specify the from and the to range. Looking at the programming constructs, we put the programming construct first, and we always indent the next line to say this is the code to be part of the loop. So welcome back. So this is looking at two parts. So for loops in loops and while loops, i.e. conditional loops. So I'll just finish off for loops. So this is I'm showing you here a simple loop that we showed before. So remember, we put it in the construct for count being the variable in range 1 to 13, so it'll count from 1 to 12. And then you'll notice an additional for count here, which starts with the variable count2 with the range 1 to 13, so it'll count from 1 to 12. Now, what we've got here is a loop within a loop. So in other words, it will do this loop 12 times, and then it will do, within that loop, it will do it another 12 times. So effectively 12 times 12, which is a big loop. And this is basically what I'm doing here is producing a times, the full times table. So what I'm doing is I'm going to print the count, which will be this loop here, times the count, i.e. this loop here, and it will give me the answer. So if I was to run this program, it will display my times table, as you can see here. So it goes through every single one. So this will be the first iteration, the first loop, if you like, and then the second loop, and then the third loop, and then it will keep going round for the outer loop, and then for the inner loop, it will do the 1 to 12 for each times table. And that's essentially what a loop within a loop is. So that's finishing off for loops. Now, the other one I want to go over is while loops, which are very, very useful for things like validation, which I will show you here. Validation means checking that the data that you've entered into the computer program is in the correct format or the way that you want it. And we call that validation. So I'll show you a simple loop. Now, a while loop works very similar to a for loop, but except what it does, it uses obviously the command while, which is this bit here, and then we specify the condition. Now, it's the same as an if loop, so you can have single conditions or multiple conditions. If you've got multiple conditions, you'll need the and or logical operators. So in this case, I've set variable to 0, so the count starts off with 0, and it says while count is less than 10, then do the following command. So I'm going to print the contents of count, which on the first run will be 0, and I'm going to add 1 to the count, and it will loop back, and it will say, is the count still less than 10? Yes, it is. And it will keep doing that until it gets to 10. So it will loop 10 times because obviously it's starting from 0. So that's one simple loop. So it's very similar to the for loop, except we're using a condition rather than a range command. Now, this is more of a validation loop. This is a sort of better way of using while loops if you're doing a condition. And what this does, I'm going to create what we call a variable, a Boolean variable. And if you remember in the first lesson, we talked about data types. Now, another data type that I've not mentioned before is what we call a Boolean data type. Now, Boolean data type can have two values, false or true and false. And in Python, you always name it with a capital and you say false or true. And it's what we call a Boolean data type. It only has two sets, two values. So I'm going to set a variable called valid to false. And I'm going to say while not valid. Now remember, not invert. So valid effectively becomes true because it's false, so it becomes true. So it's basically saying it's a true statement, therefore it will run the command. But it's just a nice way of wording it because it's basically saying while it's not valid. It's going to get an input from the user. So it's going to get an input, convert into an integer. So the score, you'll enter percentage value. Now this is again the validation bit. I've said if my score is between 0 and 100, so equal to 0 or below those values, then valid equals true. So I'm changing the contents of this variable now to true. If it's not in those values, then print it's an invalid entry. And if it's an invalid entry, so let's say I entered 150, it will loop back because it's part of the while loop, and it says, goes back up to the top and says, while not valid. Well, actually, it's still not valid. If I do create a value, so say 50, what will it do? It will set valid to true. So when it goes back out the loop, valid, it is now valid. So the loop will finish and it will let you carry on with the rest of the program. And just to prove out my point, I will run it. So you will get down here. So that's my first while bit that counts from 0 to 9. That's that first while loop. And then this one here saying enter your percentage score. So let's say I enter an illegal score 105, which is clearly outside the range near 0 to 100. I press enter. and it's obviously says no, it's not a valid entry, so it outputs invalid entry, and it repeats the while loop. It goes back and asks you again, and it will keep doing that, keep looping until I enter a valid value. So if I put -1, that's invalid, but if I put the value 25, that is in the range 0 to 100, and it says fine, finish the code. So that's when we can use while loops, conditional loops. So to recap, while loops are conditional loops, and we can demonstrate that using the program structure while followed by the condition, and you put the code after the while statement as shown below. We can use while loops for validation, i.e. checking the data is in the correct format using the following program, where we're using a Boolean value to set the condition for the loop.